So here on this bike we can see that on the other side the brake pad is dragging on the rim, even though the brake lever is not pressed down. And on the other side we can see that there is actually quite a bit of space between the rim and the brake pad. So the brake arms, they don't have equal tension. I'll press on the brake lever up here. I can see that the left side V-arm is moving, but on the right side it's actually almost stationary. One other thing to check on the brake pads is that they are aligned on the rim, so they are not above the rim or below the rim, so these are quite okay. And here also it is pretty well aligned. So in order to get an equal space between the brake pad and the rim on both sides, we need to adjust this tension screw here. There's quite a lot of adjustment that can be done. It's almost loose, and on the other side we can see that it's like halfway in. So we need to adjust this screw, so turning it clockwise will bring more space between the brake pad and the rim on this side, and it will also cause the space on the other side to go smaller. So in this case let's try to adjust it by turning it clockwise. By turning it anti-clockwise, it would bring the brake pad closer to the rim. So I already turned it quite a lot, and now let's press on the brake lever, and we can see that it already did help a bit, and we have some space between the rim and the pad. But we can also see that on the other side there's a lot more movement. So I think we need to try to tighten it still, maybe a bit over one round. Now we can see that the movement has increased. So now with the bike in this position we can see a bit better that when we press the brake lever, both arms on the left and the right are moving, and what we want to achieve is alignment where the brake pads don't press on the rim unequally in a way which would bend the rim. The brake lever is moving almost all the way to the bottom. We cannot easily apply enough force on the brakes, so we can either adjust here to tighten the brake cable, or we can loosen this bolt and tighten the cable slightly. That will decrease the spacing here, and it will be possible to apply a bit more brake force. So I will go ahead and tighten it from here because it's quite minor, the adjustment which we need. So I just loosen this a bit to tighten the cable. And now it feels already better. To me it seems that both sides are moving quite equally, and looking here, the space between the rim and the brake pad is very similar on both sides, so I'm quite happy with this adjustment. The brake lever feels good, and when pressing strongly on the brake lever, I don't feel the rim moving from side to side, so that would imply that the brakes are aligned correctly. If the pressing of the brake lever moves the rim or bends the rim to one side or the other, it's causing the spokes to loosen up and can also damage the rim, so it's important to have the brake pads or brake arms, the V-arms aligned correctly.
For this job, you'll need a 5mm Allen key, a Phillips screwdriver, a strip of sandpaper, and an optional cable puller. The first step is to set up your brake levers. Start by loosening the clamp and then align them so they match the angle of your arms when you're riding. Once the angle is set, tighten the clamp. If you have smaller hands and your levers are hard to reach, you can set them closer by tightening the reach adjustment screw on most levers. Start by giving the cable some slack. Tighten the lever's barrel adjuster in all the way. Then pull the protective rubber back and disconnect the brake cable's quick release mechanism. Then remove the pads. V-brake pads have 2 sets of positioning washers on each side of the brake arm. Be careful to watch how the washers are positioned so that you can reinstall them correctly. Inspect your pads. If they are worn past the indicator line or have metal poking through the surface, you'll need to replace them. If they look okay, use your sandpaper to resurface both pads. Now check your brake arm tension. The brake arms should have good spring tension, which makes them release when you let go of the brake lever. If there isn't much tension, you may have to increase it on both sides. Undo both bolts one at a time, but don't remove them completely. You'll notice a small piece of metal poking out the backside of the brake. This is the spring, and it slides into one of 3 holes on your frame or fork. Most brakes work fine in the middle hole. To increase your brake tension, move the spring into the top hole. To decrease the brake tension, move the spring into the bottom hole, then tighten the mounting bolt. Now reinstall the brake pads, with the washers in the same order as they were before. Align the brake pads so the pad face is flat against the rim. V-brake pads are different from traditional pads in that they don't require any toe-in. Both the front and rear of the pad should contact the rim at the same time. Because of this, V-brakes will sometimes squeak when applied. If you've resurfaced the pads and they are still noisy, you may have to try a higher quality set of pads. Take a look from the side to make sure the pad is in line with the rim's brake surface and not touching the tire or hanging off the bottom of the rim. With the pads installed, check the brake arm position. Both arms should be facing straight up and down when the pads are contacting the rim. If they are too wide apart or too close together, you may have to rearrange the pad washers. One set of washers is usually thicker than the other. To correct brake arms that are too far apart, make sure the smallest set of washers are closest to the pads. To correct brake arms that are too close together, make sure the largest set of washers are closest to the pads. Now reconnect the cable and adjust the cable tension on the brake arm by pulling the cable through the pinch bolt and tightening. You'll have to play with this adjustment until your brakes feel good. I like to have mine set so the pads hit the rim when my lever is pulled about a quarter of the way. Make sure both pads now have equal clearance and are not rubbing against the rim. Both pads should contact the rim at the same time. If not, you can adjust the centering by tightening or loosening the side adjustment screw with your screwdriver.
Are a Phillips head screwdriver, a 5mm Allen wrench, and an optional zip tie. Before this adjustment's made, you really want to try to make sure that your wheels are true. It will increase your braking performance. Now, the first thing you do before you adjust any type of brake, whether it's rim brake or disc brake or any kind of brake, is to make sure the wheels are completely in the dropouts. Put the bicycle on the ground, release the front quick release, make sure that wheel is all the way in the dropouts, and then re-lock in the quick release. You're going to want to do this for both the front wheel and the back wheel. We're going to put the bike up in the stand. Okay, now we're ready to adjust our brake pads. First thing we want to do is release the brake and take that optional zip tie. You want to wrap this zip tie around the very back end of the brake pad, the very back section of it. Now what this is going to do, this is going to create a toe-in on the brake pad. Okay, and what this toe-in does, it keeps the brake pads, it helps keep the brake pads from squealing. Okay, next, attach the noodle back into its little cage right there. And then we're going to go up here to the barrel adjuster, and you want to adjust this barrel adjuster out about 6 turns. There's a little slot on the barrel adjuster for that cable to slide in when you're replacing the cable. You can use that as a reference point. So we're going to turn it out 6 turns. 2, it's about 3, that's about 6 turns. You can see quite a bit of thread showing from there. Okay, next, take your 5mm Allen wrench and take all the slack out of the cable. So loosen the pinch bolt, pull all the slack out of the cable. What I'm doing, I'm just pulling the cable here and holding these 2 brake arms together so the pads are all the way up against the surface of the rim. And lock the cable back in. You don't need to over tighten it, just nice and snug is fine. Now, what I want to do when I'm aligning this pad, I want to align it as high on the braking surface on the rim as I possibly can without hitting the tire. You don't want it too low. As the pad wears, it will tend to migrate down the braking surface a little bit, and if you get it too low, it'll fall off the bottom of the rim. Take the 5mm, loosen up the bolt on there, and then move that brake pad up, like I said, as high as you can. It's going to be a little bit tight because remember we took all the slack out of the cable. Slide all the way up there, making sure that the pad is as high as it'll go. Also that the front edge of the pad is in the same location on the rim as the back section of the pad, and the pad is flat up against the rim surface. And now we're going to lock this pad into place. That aligns up your pad. You're going to do the same thing to the pad on the other side. Once we're done with aligning the brake pad, I'm going to go over here and turn your barrel adjuster back in all the way. Back in, all 6 turns, all the way back in. Now you can remove this zip tie that you put on there. And now you want to pull on your brake lever several times. And what you're looking for now, you're looking for an even spacing of the brake pads coming off the rim on both sides. So what you want is you want this brake pad right here to come off the rim the same amount as the opposing brake pad. What you can do is take your Phillips head screwdriver and adjust this Phillips head screw down at the bottom. What this Phillips head screw does is adjust the spring tension on this brake arm only, okay? So when you screw it in, it increases the spring tension on this brake arm, and it also increases the deflection of the brake arm off the pad. So if I go in here and screw this in, you're going to see that now this brake arm is moving a lot. This brake arm isn't moving hardly any at all. It's because I basically unbalanced the system. I put more spring tension on this side than I did on this side. Now I have a choice on how to fix that. I can either release tension from this side or increase tension on this side. I'm just going to go ahead and release the tension back. So I'm going to unscrew it a little bit, and now you're going to see that both brake arms are moving equally, and we're getting equal distance off the rim on both sides. Okay, that's how you adjust linear pull brakes. If you'd like to learn more, visit our Performance Bicycle Learning Center, or if you live near one of our performance bike shops, you can come in and talk to one of our spin doctor mechanics and have a great ride.
But so what commonly happens here is that these brakes aren't working. So let's say you're riding along, you're rolling and you squeeze your brake, nothing happens. Wheel's still spinning. This is my front brake on the left here. Oh, sorry, left of the bike. So I've set this brake up with the most common problems that we see. In the interest of you understanding these problems when they happen to you or happen to someone you know, you can quickly fix them, get them on the road again. Most common problem that we see is that the noodle is not retained in the noodle retainer. So this curved piece of metal right here, the cable passes through this. This is called the noodle, and it needs to be retained in this little noodle retainer bracket, I suppose. So the way you do that is you're going to pull the noodle with one hand and you're going to move the brake in with the other hand, and then this kind of slides into a slot here and it gets retained like that. So these V-brake retention brackets have a little slot where this the head of the noodle sort of fits in, the cable can pass through, and now it's retained. So I urge you to do this in a non-emergency situation to practice this. This is also how you get your front wheel off if you want to say put the bike on in the back of a car, for instance. So now the noodle is in the correct spot. So the noodle is attached. So we're going to try this again. I'm actually going to try and replicate this other problem that I was hoping to do. We're going to try again. Oh, this doesn't feel very good. Okay, so now this feels kind of tight. There's some like friction in the cable. Another very common problem that we see is that the cable does not enter the barrel adjuster correctly. It instead is to the side of the barrel adjuster and it's like sort of partially through the adjustment. There's like a slot here that the cable can pass through. I'll try to get a shot to highlight that. So basically this cable is just not where it needs to go. The cable is passing through the side of the barrel adjuster, which introduces some friction. So what we're going to do is we're going to resolve that. We can see that so this cable is out of the barrel adjuster. The cable end does not run smoothly through the center of the barrel adjuster. I'm simply going to pull the cable back, line it with the slot, and it goes in the barrel adjuster. So now the barrel adjuster turns freely. So this is how we can do fine adjustments on our brake cable tension, and the cable moves freely as well. Okay, so we're not done yet. There's a little squeak here. That's not the problem. The problem is that one side of the brake is moving, the other side is not. It's just up against the tire. So if you're going to run, it's going to rub. You can probably see the problem here. What's happened here is that the spring that makes the right side arm spring back has come undone. So each of these V-brakes has a little post here, and this little post, the spring goes on the other side of the post and sort of tensions this outward so that both of these V-brake arms, the caliper arms, are pulled outward or pushed outward by the force of the spring. So now as we turn the lever, as we pull the lever, these V-brakes are both moving in a balanced way. So now I've replicated another very common problem. So our spring is attached, our noodle is attached, our cable is attached correctly. Things are moving smoothly at the lever, but again, you see that one side of the V-brake arms is moving readily, while the other side is not. So what's going on here is we have an imbalance in the spring tension between these two caliper arms. So most V-brakes have an adjustment screw on both sides. Some only have on one side. In this case, this is a Shimano V-brake. It's adjusted with a Phillips number 2. Some other brakes, especially some older Avid models, adjust with probably a 2.5 or 3 millimeter hex, but the adjustment works about the same. So we're just going to put a number 2 Phillips on that adjustment screw. And then what I usually do is I pull the lever with one hand, so it's off screen. I'm pulling the lever with one hand repeatedly. And then now I'm just turning this screw until these start to move about the same. So as you tighten the screw, you're increasing the spring tension, which tends to make that arm move further outbound. So that'll help you guide the adjustment process. So now you see, if I go too far, if I adjust this too far, now I've over-tensioned one spring, and now you see that this arm on the screwdriver side is moving more. So that's too far, so I'll back it off a little bit. And this is something that you just do with trial and error to try to get centered up. A little more. Oh, a little bit the other way. There we go. So now those are about balanced. And as long as your rim is true, you should run with no rubbing of the brake pads on the wheel. So another common problem is when your pads have worn and your cables have stretched, the lever pull no longer makes the pads engage with the rim. So I've replicated this by just letting some cable out. So right here, I'm pulling the lever, the brakes are moving, but I'm not getting any stopping power from the pads. You just see they're not making contact with the rim or not making contact regularly. On V-brakes, this is extremely easy to adjust. You're going to take a 5mm Allen key. Most V-brakes are adjusted with a 5mm Allen key. And there's this retention bolt. You see the cable passes through this. You're just going to loosen this cable. This bolt, you don't have to remove it. Now, what I'm going to do here is just simply pull the cable through until the brakes make contact. I'm going to back it out about 5mm, half a centimeter, and tighten this bolt up. You don't need to apply a ton of force to this bolt. You'll know if the cable slips. So now we're going to check this again. Now we have good travel of the pads. You don't want these to be too tight, such that you're rubbing the rim when they're in the slack position. But right here, you're getting a pretty good actuation of the brake pads, and they're running smoothly against the rim. Also, on many models of V-brake, there's a little stud in the back where the cable retention bolt is. The stud that retains the spring. You can use that to retain the end of the cable. Just keeps this clean. Helps avoid that from getting frayed or caught on anything.
The linear pull brake may be found on the rear or the front of the bike. Pivots for the brake are located below the braking surface. Left and right arms are pulled together by a single primary wire. A housing stop is attached to one arm. The cable extends to the other arm with a pinch bolt. Pulling the lever brings the pads to the rim. Typical tools and supplies may include hex wrenches for brake caliper mounting and pad adjustment, a fourth hand cable stretcher, torque wrench and bits to make sure things are properly tight, a screwdriver for brake centering, a cable cutter to trim the brake cable and to install the end cap, grease, a rag, and a thread locker. The linear pull brakes mount to the same frame fittings as the cantilever brake. The outside of this surface should get some grease to help them run smooth and not bind. Do not grease or lubricate the inside threads. There is typically a thread locker on the bolt, or if there's none here, thread locker could be put inside. Grease on the threads would eliminate the purpose of the thread locker. The brake calipers have a spring that will insert into one of three possible fittings. The topmost fitting provides a lot of spring tension. It is common you may have to twist the pad to get past the fork. Here, it almost feels like there's too much tension. The bottommost hole provides very little tension. Typically, select the middle hole and make sure that both sides are symmetrical and in the same middle hole. Mounting bolts are now threaded into each side. If there is pre-installed Loctite on the bolt, it is normal to feel a little resistance as it threads in. That is the thread locker doing its job. A typical torque for the mounting bolts is 8 to 10 Newton meters. The arm should still swing freely. After the arms are secured to the frame or fork, the pads are now adjusted. The common linear pull will have a threaded stud system. There is a series of convex and concave washers that create a ball and socket system. This will allow for alignment in several planes. It will allow for toe. It will allow the vertical face of the pad to be square to the rim. We can move up and down in our brake arm for height. Everything is secured with a single nut at the back of the brake stud. It's also very common to notice the slight curve in your brake pad. This curve will match the curve of the rim. Loosen the pad mount, bring the arm and pad to the rim, and adjust. Because we're traveling downward on an arc, we want to be to the top edge of the braking surface, not to the top edge of the rim, but the top of the braking surface. As the pads get thinner, it will travel down the rim more and more. Never have a pad so high it would hit a tire. With the mounting nut loose, the pad will want to move in lots of different planes. Bring the pad gently to the rim and push with some mild force and secure the nut. The pad will tend to be self-aligning and put the convex concave washers where it needs to be correctly aligned with the two flat surfaces, the rim and the pad, aligned. Tow can be had a couple of different ways. Loosen the nut and bring the wrench forward or back as needed to gain tow. Tow is useful to help reduce brake squeal. As the rim rotates forward, the pad and the arm are going to pull back and forth slightly. That can cause a squeal, which is a harmonic resonance. By introducing touch at the front and a slight gap at the back, we are reducing the tendency for the arm and pad to move back and forth quickly. That reduces squealing. We begin with the correct height. We check that the front and back edge are square and even to the rim. So for tow, we loosen the nut, pull the wrench forward in this case, and secure. Here, far too much tow. With huge amounts of tow, you're reducing braking performance as it flexes to come in and apply force to the rim. So a slight gap is what we're looking for. Bring the wrench to the back slightly. Hold and secure. A slight gap at the back, front edge and back edge even, or flat to the rim. Typical torque here, 6 to 7 Newton meters. Hold the pad as you tighten the final tightness so it doesn't twist as you tighten the mounting nut. Repeat the process on the other side. A second useful technique to get some tow is to put a shim at the back edge of the pad, align our pad fully to the rim, secure the nut, and remove the shim. A rubber band closed up can act as that shim. We'll place this on the back of the pad, loosen the mounting nut, and proceed to adjust our pad as normal. Just some mild force to the rim is going to move the stud and the washers to allow tow. Secure pad fully, remove the shim, and we have a slight gap at the back from the shim. Repeat the process on the other side. Brake cable passes through the housing, and the housing will be stopped at what is called a noodle. The noodle acts as a stop for the housing, and the cable will pass out to the other arm, allowing us to draw arms together. The noodle typically consists of a liner underneath the housing stop. This is a common place to get a lot of moisture and corrosion. Consequently, it's a good place for some lubrication. Install the wire through the noodle and out. The noodle will engage in the linkage off of one arm and pass over to the pinch bolt on the opposite arm. It is common to see a dust boot attached at this point, the idea being it's going to keep dirt out of the system. So from here, we feed through the pinch mechanism And before we draw the pads together, back out the barrel adjuster 3 or 4 turns so we can have some fine-tuning adjustments at the lever. With the housing fully secure in the noodle is secure and seated in the linkage. We are ready to draw the arms to the rim. We can do this with a 4th hand, such as the BT2. It's only necessary to touch the rim or even get really close. Don't go all the way and squeeze with force. You won't have enough adjustment to make a good setting. So it's simply to the rim, then secure the pinch bolt. If you don't have a 4th hand, you typically can just pull the arms together just with your hand and pull the cable out. You have a lot of leverage on these arms. It doesn't take a lot of force to pull the pads together. So typically just using the hand is enough. And here again, we're tightening the pinch bolt. It should flatten and crush that cable. Here, 6 Newton meters is a good average torque. We'll now set the pad clearance at the rim by the feel at the lever. If the pads are too tight, the lever is going to pull and immediately engage. That is simply too close. If the wheel comes out of true at all, it's going to rub the pads. Additionally, it really doesn't give us good braking power. Third problem, it's difficult to disengage the quick release mechanism. We should be able to pull out the linkage from the noodle. And here we are having trouble doing that. This brake is set too tight. Here we'll bring the barrel adjuster in toward the lever, giving us more slack. Here we have more travel. That's good for our leverage at the hand. We are well greater than 1 inch clearance when we're contacting, so we have plenty of brake power. And here we can disengage and re-engage our quick release easily. This brake is not too loose, it is not too tight. We would set the rear brake the same way. It's time now to center the brakes. Centering is done by subtle changes in spring tension. One side, or commonly both sides, will have a screw adjacent to the return spring. By tightening the screw, you're increasing tension on whatever side you tighten. Here, we are not centered. We have a large gap on the rider's left and touching on the right. Both pads are going to move together, but here, the right arm is weaker compared to the left. So I'm going to loosen this screw, making this one a little more equal in strength. And if we went too far, we can tighten. And if it looks good, it is good. We could have done over here, we could have tightened the screw to draw the pads to the right. We could tighten this screw to draw both pads to the left. Again, both pads are going to move if you're just dealing with one of these screws, so you don't need to do. Time now to trim the cable and install a cable end cap. It's also common on many of these brakes to have a little place to tuck the wire away so it's tucked cleanly. So we actually want to cut right about here where the thumb is. I'm going to pull that out. We're going to trim that. We'll put an end cap on and we will crimp it. Then tuck it back. It's clean and out of the way. These brakes are ready for the road.